have light refreshments outside if you guys didn't see them. All locally sourced food from Grove, North Carolina that was prepared by our dining services. This is also a zero waste event, so your serviceware, your plates, your cups, your leftover food is all compostable. So on your way out the door, you can just drop them off in the green bag right there with our intern Virginia. We'll be able to compost everything that you guys have today. And this is our director, Dr. Fitri, is just going to say a couple of words before we start the discussion.
Hi everyone, first thanks for coming to our first green bag of the season of the academic year. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the Carter Real Estate Center, the Urban Studies Club, the Urban Studies Program, which is doing a fantastic job and obviously integrates in fantastic ways in dynamic ways with sustainability, and the Department of Political Science for their support. It's great to see this kind of collaboration across the campus, particularly in different silos, different spheres of our campus that can't be emphasized enough. Real quickly, I may have to dart out here at some point. I was late because my son, my 3-year-old's coming out of surgery, and my wife is texting me, so there's been some complications. So I may have to dart out, and please forgive me if my mind just starts to wander here in the middle of this introduction. Sustainability and urbanism, and kind of thinking about the way we design things. This is an extraordinarily salient topic because for me, sustainability is not an environmental problem. The reality it is, and I talk to students about this quite often, is that if there's one word to describe the state of the earth and the state of the world right now, it's just simply unsustainable. That is, we can no longer sustain what we've built. Think about that for a second. We can no longer sustain what has been built in any form. People will say to me in a lot of ways, why is it that we focus on just sustaining something? It's pretty easy. We can't sustain what we've built without further exploitation. And it's reached the species level, meaning that we've reached a point where we cannot continue to exploit each other for a material gain without affecting us in some form. Whether you're part of the elite or you're part of the marginalized, this is a serious problem now that resonates and affects every human being on the planet. What this suggests is that this is a design problem. This is not an environmental problem. It's a design problem. We have designed our systems to be a prominent player in economic growth. We've designed our systems so that they can economically grow. I don't blame anybody in the system. It is what it is. It's part of our evolution as a species. But it's also a responsibility as part of that evolution of the species to push this further and to evolve past the industrial era, which is straining our limits and our ability to cooperate and collaborate in ways that help us to build a more civilized world. So that sets up why I think this panel is such an important part of how we think about sustainability, both philosophically and ultimately how we implement sustainability in our communities. Two things that I've been spending a lot of time on. I'm just going to talk to them briefly. One's on climate change, and the second's on those that are marginalized in our system. This does not, I don't mean to suggest that this is what sustainability and urbanism is about. It's just two aspects of what I see as the problem. Let me give you some data. We had the Department of Homeland Security, I don't know if you know this, but the Department of Homeland Security picked Charleston as a place to have their first tabletop exercise on how climate change is affecting our communities and our cities. It picked Charleston for a reason. Let me give you some data. Here's some data that comes out of not the Department of Homeland Security, but our best scientists. They did a study on Charleston. Days above 95 degrees in a moderate scenario. Today we experience about 4 days above 95 degrees. It may seem like that, but this is now it may seem like that, but on average it's about 4. By 2025 that will double. By 2050 it will double again. By 2100 it will double again. In moderate scenarios, we're going to experience 30 days above 95 degrees. The high estimate is 75 days. When it comes to precipitation, which is largely going to be our significant problem here, increased heavy rain events, which have already exponentially increased, we're going to experience 30% more by 2050 with drought, meaning that when rain comes, it's going to come down in a downpour, and there's going to be days, long periods without rain. We've experienced 1 foot foot of sea level rise since 1900. Half of that is from subsidence. So the land is sinking concomitant with increased sea level rise. By 2050, Charleston is looking at 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise under moderate scenarios. We've experienced 1 foot of sea level rise just since the year 2000. By 2100, we'd be looking at 4 to 7 feet. So when you start thinking about urbanism in the Lowcountry, these are important facts that we have to consider. And the science has hardened to the point where these still are broad ranges, but when you're talking about a couple of feet of sea level rise, this is significant for an area that is at sea level in some places or below sea level. The second part, I'm going to be very quick about this, is marginalization. When we think about designing and sustainability, designing cities, we need to think about those that are marginalized. From a sustainability perspective, you're only as strong as your weakest area, your weakest link. So concern for the marginalized is not just a justice issue, it's an integral part of how we think about systems and how we build systems. When we start to think about who's marginalized, typically we think of those on the fringes, those who are in lower socioeconomic brackets. Fair enough. But what I'd like to call your attention to is that the vast majority of us are increasingly marginalized. There's a large pool of middle-class folks that are growing in their vulnerability to economic turbulence, financial instability, to obviously environmental hazards that we experience, food systems. Our energy systems are extremely fragile. I would call them brittle. This is a security risk to every person, but mainly those that are in the middle class. So I would just like to have us have an appreciation of what I call the double vulnerable, those that are in the lower socioeconomic bracket, that are on the fringes of society, that aren't part of that flow of opportunity. But increasingly, we're all, in some form, at least the vast majority of us are in this pool that one could classify as increasingly marginalized. So I think with that said, I'd like to turn it over to the panel and have them discuss each of their own experiences in this field and what they're seeing about how do we redefine and redesign our urban spaces. So with that said, our esteemed assistant professor, Dr. Keenan, would you like to start us off?
Well, no, you would have.
Oh, you had it. I thought you were going first.
Yeah,
Okay. You're the moderator? I'm sorry I put it like that.
That's fine. I think we'll start off with each of our panelists. If you guys want to introduce yourselves and how your work relates to the topic, and then we'll start with a little bit of what is urbanism, and then actually hoping to have more of an organic discussion between everyone here and our panelists today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Taylor. Today I represent the U.S. Green Building Council. By show of hands, who's heard of the U.S. Green Building Council? Okay, maybe a third, maybe half. It's an international organization. We have the South Carolina chapter, which breaks down into 4 branches. And so I represent the Lowcountry branch. Professionally, I'm with ABC Engineering in Hanahan doing site services, and happy to be here. Appreciate y'all coming. Can we give a round of applause for everyone who's here today?
I'm Kevin Keenan. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science here at the College of Charleston, and I direct our undergraduate urban studies program. And also, we have a certificate in urban and regional planning at the graduate level. So I've spent a lot of time focused on urban issues and studying them, particularly urban policy. And I'm somewhat versed in the vulnerability literature because my main focus of research has been on terrorism as a hazard that affects people who live in cities. So it's in the orbit of vulnerability analyses, not necessarily environmental, but some of the literature obviously is crossing over between these two.
My name is Tim Keane, and I run the planning department for the city of Charleston. Planning, preservation, and sustainability, and our responsibility is everything that has to do with city development, growth, architecture, design, regulation, anything related to planning and development of the city. I do also teach a course here at the college whenever I can, and they'll let me, and appreciate forums like this and all the work the college is doing in the area of these issues.
Thank you. I'm Mayor Linda Page. I'm mayor of the town of Mount Pleasant. It is a part-time job in the town of Mount Pleasant, so for career, I am an auctioneer by trade, and I'm also in the antique business. I'm very familiar with sustainability. I've been a recycler my whole life. So still continue to recycle.
So I think we'll just start out with general questions. What is urbanism? Urban studies.
Well, I guess I can just sort of add one thing to start us off, thinking about this term of urbanism, right? ISM is sort of at the end of this term. We can talk about urbanization, which is the process of building cities, which is often very closely connected to our economy and the advancements in our economy. But I think the part urbanism touches very nicely with what Dr. Fisher said in the introduction. Urbanism, in my mind, is the way that people think about their lives in cities, the way we build and sort of conceptualize what we're doing, the lives we're enacting in an urban environment. It can also be a suburban environment, and to some extent also on the fringes of the suburban. So that's how I would frame the term urbanism.
Yeah, and I'll make a point. Those that are in an urban setting, the majority of people in America and even across the world tend to be in cities. So how we design, how we live in an urban setting is extremely critical. The rural aspect is important as well. But as far as changing culture and changing how we live, urbanism is really where we need to centralize our thought and sort of the general map of how cities tend to be built. You have the urban core, and then generally it tends to sprawl out. And that deals with sustainability anyway, because urban sprawl is something that we try to curtail. It affects transportation and many other aspects of sustainability. So we definitely need to think about how we live and design. And I want to make a point too, sustainability, we talk about designers and this and that, how we design society, but it has to do a lot with the end user. And that's why it's so important that some of us that are here today to join in on the conversation, because we are all end users of urbanism, more or less. We all live in the urban environment. So we need to, number one, understand how the urban environment is designed, and then understand how is the best way for us to live within that urban environment.
Let me just add one more thing, because the slide was mentioned. We were going to come to this a little bit later, but I just want everyone to sort of take notice of this. Sorry, I'm standing, and then we'll keep going down the panel. But this slide, if you look here in the center, this is supposed to show the sort of historical aspect of how cities grew, particularly in the Northeast. In some parts of the Southwest, we see a very different model. But basically, this was the walking city, the historic walking city before we had automobility, and everything was very dense and clustered together. You had to walk or take the horse somewhere. But with transportation improvements, starting with the streetcar, that's these lines in the back, you may not be able to see them, the city turned into this star-shaped pattern as people started to spread out further and further. Then we had a lot of policy support from the federal government with the 1956 Highway Act to build many highways in the United States. And that's represented by these red lines, where you're seeing further and further expansion of the urbanization part of this going out. And then most recently, these would be the superhighways, further and further out. This is urbanization, but then there's actually people who are consciously making decisions about, we could call it maybe quality of life or different aspects that they find attractive, right? Driving out here and settling further and further away from what was once a very dense urban core. Can you do the next slide? This is just Houston. I'll just show you in the modern time. I mean, really, there was somewhat of a core in Houston, but now we have these highways where really the city has been settled without ever really developing a strong central core. So in some of the southwestern cities and on the West Coast particularly, you can think of LA, it's all sort of built around the highway. Sort of this massive consumption of land. You have ideas of privacy, again, urbanism, right? People want to use their private cars and those sorts of things. So that's all I'll say on this, and I want to welcome back.
Well, and I'll tag on that really quickly regarding urbanism and highways. If you think about it, the thing that most affects transportation and congested highways is the distance from where you live to where you work. That's really all it entails, because most of your trips on a daily basis are simply from where you live to where you work and back. And so urban sprawl is one reason it is sort of detrimental to urbanism is it expands that nuclear core, and then you have congested highways. You have to have the money to expand those highways as you continue to sprawl. People tend to still like the nucleus, so they'll tend to still go to that central area. So it creates issues. I don't know if any of y'all have to go down I-26 on a daily basis, but if you do, then you know what I'm talking about. You feel my pain.
When I hear the term urbanism or urban or anything, any variant of that, I think of a very specific place, in a kind of place, not, general, occupation of land by people, but a place that's of a specific type, that some people choose, to live in and others don't. There are terms that I don't use publicly, because people react to them negatively. They don't want to be in an urban place or be part of urbanism, any more than they want to be in some place that's dense, or a place where there's traffic. That's what these things mean to people. So, but I think it's an important word, and one that should connote something very specific about a place.
Thank you, Tim. Urbanism to the town of Mount Pleasant is a term that we hear recently quite often. I grew up in Mount Pleasant since 1959, and we were a very small central village, so to speak. But we still had a lot of other areas that were developed in town. So the term urbanism is negative to the town of Mount Pleasant. The comments we hear are negative because people are afraid of their quality of life. Being built in a suburban, we have more of a suburban feel. So people wanted larger yards. I mean, I personally bought my home because my children were small and I wanted green areas around my house and swing sets. So I wasn't looking for a walkable central core, which is what I think of in an urban setting. So urbanism is fairly negative right now to the town of Mount Pleasant because we're in a little bit of we're trying to redefine our central core because our central core has moved away. So it's an issue we're very much we talk about it often. It's not something I use on a day-to-day. It's not a term I use in conversation. We talk more about revitalization. But we're very much concerned about the existing citizens. So we don't want to create clash. So we are creating more urban nodes. So we already have areas that have sprawled away. But then you have to say, can I have everything that I need close to my house? So perhaps we do have some sprawl, but perhaps my sprawl, which is 5 miles from the central core, 10 miles from the central core, has shopping opportunities and entertainment opportunities that are close by, so I don't get in my car. So urbanism in the town of Mount Pleasant is right now very much a topic of conversation.
So I would just argue here, this is a slide that's meant to capture a theory by a professor of urban studies who argues that essentially, similar to what Linda was just saying, it's not necessarily a suburban environment, but we have moved to an urban realm where you may have a central city. So you can think of a core urban area, but even suburban areas now are sort of moving into this idea of an urban realm, that they're constantly, if you drive certain places, you're constantly surrounded by some level of density. You're seeing the emergence of shopping centers, you're seeing the emergence of sprawling homes, houses built further and further out. So even if it is a suburban feel, some people are arguing it's really an urban realm. You're never really escaping this sort of urban pattern.
And I'll make another point on density, as Linda mentioned. There's kind of a sweet spot to designing density. LEED has some points for a certain level of density. Establishing multi-story apartment buildings, condo buildings, that kind of thing. And it has benefits because everyone's sort of close by. If you're dense here, you can have workplaces and you go to work quickly and closely. But then, when we think about it, most of us don't want, as Lynn mentioned, most of us don't want to live in a super dense location. If you think about New York, I've traveled to numerous locations. I'll take Seattle, for instance. Seattle's a big city, but it's really too big for me. I'm used to Charleston. I like James Island, for instance, where I grew up, and that's sort of the level of density that I enjoy. So while, for instance, while Lee has points for a certain level of density, there's, you don't want to be too much work to do.
I would also just take issue with the idea that people, increasingly, the younger generations are choosing more urban environments. They're wanting to live in environments that have some continuous cycle of activity, some street life, some daily activities that they can engage in beyond sort of the traditional suburban or even rural setting that we tend to say a lot of people historically have wanted. So you are seeing a shift. There are many factors for that shift, but you are seeing a significant portion of younger people choosing the more urban dense environment.
I mean, I think definitely there's people, there are all kinds of people that want all different kinds of places to live. Some want to be in very conditions, very dense. I mean, that's how they want to live their life. And then others that don't, that want to be in a very low density or even rural. But the problem is that my feeling about it is most of the decisions that get made in most communities these days are based on one lifestyle, one expectation about how you want to live, and that's that you're going to drive to do anything. And so everything else falls off of that. And so all the concern and complaints about traffic, which kind of affect everything that has to do with land use, come from everybody that drives everywhere. So, every house generates 10-car trips a day. The only way to deal with traffic is for you not to drive so much. And to make it, and the problem isn't that some people decide that's fine for people to choose to live that way. It's just that why are we all trying to solve all the problems that come from it? It's like I've decided to live as far as I can from my work and drive and everything. But I want you to fix all the traffic between my house and there. That's literally the expectation. So if I choose to live in a more urban environment and I choose a small house, I put up with 2 bedrooms rather than 4. I have a bath and a half. I'm not then going to the government and saying, give me another bath and a half and another bedroom because of my choice as to where I live. It's amazing because so much of this comes down to expectations about lifestyle and what government does for you. To me, it affects so many decisions that impact how we grow and how we can grow, how we're even capable of growing. So I definitely think there's just and government in many ways has said there's only one way to live, and that's low density drive everywhere, and we've required that of everybody that builds. And now we're changing that. I mean that's what Mount Pleasant's doing. Everybody's trying to say no, that's not quite as simple as that. Some people want to live in more urban conditions, and maybe some more urban places can help with traffic or give people options so they don't have to drive so much, that kind of thing. That's the struggle right now, because once people start out here in Mount Pleasant or Charleston or James Island, wherever it is.
It really is, and people are afraid to talk about that in transit. And transit gets scary because people think that, particularly in a community like mine, people think that the government, the elected officials, are taking away choices, and we're really not taking away any choices. We're really just trying to offer alternatives. So, you have to consider all forms of growth, all types of density, and you have to look at things subjectively as elected officials. But at the same time, we never talked about transit east of the Cooper until pretty recently. And we talk about transit a lot now. We talk about shelters and stops and convenience, and we talk about how often the bus will be there. And I met yesterday here at the College of Charleston, and we talked about parking rides for students. Because it's $600 a semester for you to bring your car over here if you live across the bridge, which is just a few miles away. So, some of the urbanism is not the all scary, big density thing. Government leaders are also trying to look at, to me, traffic reduces investment in my community. If I have high congestion, lots of traffic, you're not going to want to live there or do business there. It really hinders my economy and it hinders quality of life. So, you know, when people hear me talking about issues like new urbanism or urbanism, they get scared and they say, well, you know, the mayor's liberal, or, you know, that is a very liberal point of view. It isn't at all. I'm a very conservative person who happens to recycle and is very sustainable and likes to talk about things that make the community better without endangering the people that are already there. Because there's plenty of room for all of it.
One point just to add to that, and I saw someone had their hand up, so we can come to that. But new urbanism, this is the term where people are basically talking about building cities in a way that we used to build them a long time ago. So new urbanism is really old urbanism. It's returning to this sort of idea that we are increasing choices for people, right? That you can walk someplace if you want to walk someplace. You can take another form of transportation if you want to go there. But you know, honestly, I mean, I live in a suburban environment right now, and it's not very easy. I could walk someplace if I want to spend about 20 to 25 minutes to get to the nearest store to purchase something. So by design, I am essentially required to use my car. So new urbanism is really old urbanism, right? It's the way Europeans did it for a long time, and the way we settled our northeastern cities. If you ever go up there. People ask questions?
Yeah,
Had a hand
absolutely.
up.
Sure, I was just going back to the original comment as this discussion was set up. Doesn't all of that come back to sort of controlled growth and planning ahead of time? As somebody who grew up in a city that was 1,700 years old, I know what you're talking about is sort of that organic growth, but that organic growth happened way before the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the automobile. I also lived for 6 years in Portland, Oregon, which is the model planned city that addresses issues both within the urban core as well as on the periphery of it. And it doesn't just, and then the urban core is not any scarier than the suburbia, and it provides, and it kind of handles growth, development, and transportation and all those spectrum. And then I came back to Charleston, where I choose to live in the urban core. I still have the same transportation issues that somebody on the outside, on the outskirts has. Mine are not car related, mine are more pedestrian and bicycle and skateboard related. But they're still the same issues, and doesn't that all come back to planning and dealing with those issues where they happen? And I don't know, you know, if this is a question for Tim or more for the urban studies and how this works.
Well, I mean, I guess, of course, the answer is yes, but, and there, you know, there's a tremendous amount of planning that goes on. I mean, Charleston County, for instance, back in 2000 or 99, I guess, we created the first urban growth boundary in the history of this region. Huge decision, it was a multi-year negotiation with property owners, all kinds of, you know, it was very difficult. And, you know, New York Times, front page kind of stuff. So that was a huge land use planning decision. It's not quite like Portland, but it's going to have to do for here. And then, I mean, the thing is, all these things that are happening, whether it's Coleman Boulevard or the cities, you know, urban centers, the suburbs, all these things, that's all part of planning. That's all, you know, when you talk about, well, this is what planning is, you know, and it generates all this conflict in communities. And as much as people might participate in the planning, not everybody does, and things start getting built, and suddenly there's a backlash that can really have some pretty dramatic consequences. You know, if there isn't the leadership, you know, to keep going, you know, and so far we've had the leadership in Mount Pleasant and Charleston for 2 places to keep going, but it's problematic.
As far as planning goes from a municipal point of view, obviously elected officials are not planners. We have our planners here. Actually, two of my planners are here, Kelly and Christine are in the back. And what we do in the town of Mount Pleasant, and this is the real problem today, and this is the way to solve it. We have a comprehensive plan. It's a 10-year plan. We just reviewed it for 5-year update, and we change that plan based on input we get from the citizens. And we also have a strategic plan. So the comprehensive plan is the planning tool. It isn't all the ordinances and all the rules that go with it, but it's the roadmap. And we have an urban growth boundary, and we do say that in these areas there'll be 3 units per acre, and these units will be 20 units per acre. And, you know, we change that plan based on the input of citizens. The real problem is the people that we get the most input from are the older citizen, you know, my demographic, you know, your parents' demographic. And, you know, we get a lot of input from them because they are the not in my backyard people. And they're not the not in my backyard people because they hate it, but possibly they you know, they feel like they're very invested in it. But you are the ones who have to be invested, the younger people I'm speaking to here, because we don't hear from, you know, the 18-year-olds and the 20-year-olds, the 22-year-olds. Our plans are going to be based on our vision because we're the elected officials. So planning is the key, but it's with citizen input. So without citizen engagement and input, planning is just a tool that lays in a drawer somewhere.
So what would you say is the best platform for engagement and for citizens?
Depends on your town, depends on your opportunity.
It's the best place is the official process where decisions get made. You know, planning commission meetings, planning committee meetings of the city council, you know, the council meetings when votes are made, when presentations of plans are made, and that's the place to have to be effective. I rarely see younger people at our public. I mean, I've had one public meeting where there was a huge young person turnout.
Skateboard park.
No, it was related to closing bars.
Yeah.
That was the only meeting where a majority of the, or even, you know, a decent amount of the participants were young. But, yeah, official meetings where votes are taken.
I guess this is directed more for you two, but you kind of mentioned about activity and how do you exactly survey and how do you publicize like these meetings, 1, and 2, is there an equal, would you take an equal representation? It seems like there's only one specific population that is involved with this stuff, so people who have been living there, family who's had land there for hundreds or like a long time, especially you hear a lot of things with Gullah Geechee, like what's your approach to that and how do you handle those situations?
Well, I can answer how we have learned that social media and electronic data sharing is the best way for people to get engaged. Mm-hmm. We actually have a Notify Me. We have a website. You can actually go on. We can tweet you. We can email you. We can get you all of the data that you need about every meeting. You can see the minutes. You can see the agendas. It's all available electronically because we found that a lot of people want to be involved, but they don't have the time to go to meetings. Mm-hmm. We're building a new town hall in a couple of years, and the most important issue for me was, do we have the IT in place to do live streaming? You know, because perhaps I could be doing something else, but perhaps I could be listening to what's going on, because these are the decisions that affect your future. So you can sit here and talk about how you create the change, but until you're involved with your elected officials in your municipality, you really don't create the change.
But
so
what about the people who don't have access to that type of technology, though, that have still been living there for quite some time?
It's all printed. We also do old school. We advertise in the newspaper every meeting. We post every meeting, and we have a great relationship with. I mean, I met with some landowners today that did own their property for 100 years. You know, we do have the Gullah Geechee corridor, and we have a great relationship with Charles Pinckney and the people who, you know, work with the folks that are in that Gullah Geechee corridor. So, you know, we get our information out there. And big yellow sign. You see a big yellow sign, stop, and it has a QR code reader. So you actually can get out and you can get your smartphone and you can scan it, and it will take you right to the meeting.
I'm a junior in the Global Logistics and Transportation Department, and my question goes directly to the transportation aspect. And growing up here in Charleston, since 1989, my family grew up on James Island. The amount of traffic and the volume of traffic, especially on Foley Road, has increased exponentially. Is there a plan and or an economic desire to really increase effective mass transportation measures from the urban core of downtown Charleston to the surrounding? Because right now it's pretty much CARTA, and that's about it, as far as I know, anyway. So
This is a great question. Let me ask, how many people have used CARTA here. Good number, that's good. So for the students here, CARTA is free. Every College of Charleston employee can use the CARTA system for free. Now, I will just tell you, I'm a regular user of CARTA, and there is virtually, I never see students, so it's good to see so many people are actually using this system on a regular basis, but when I talk to the people at CARTA, I teach an urban transportation course, they do come, they say, tell people to use CARTA, because the more people we have using it, the more of a case they can make to expand the system. It's going to cost money. I mean, it will cost money to have a robust public transit system, but if the ridership's not there.
Well, I was the vice chair of CARTA for several years, and it is difficult because you run public transportation is typically run off of federal money and state and local money. It never pays for itself. So you have to have a buy-in. And I say it never pays for itself because it can. There are cities that do have transit cities that pay for themselves. But, the challenge is for town of Mount Pleasant, I work very tirelessly to have effective small routes that people would ride. And now we're building ridership, and it's awesome because the more riders we get, the more service we'll get. So that's the way public transportation works. If you want more, you have to use it more. And ultimately, we're going to, we talk about I-26 changes and we talk about building I-526, but what we don't talk about is articulated buses up and down Rivers Avenue, or articulated buses on I-26, or a route on particular, James Island, where there's a dedicated bus lane. So if there was a dedicated lane for a bus to ride in, would perhaps people ride it? I don't know. I'm not a transit planner. I'm an auctioneer by trade.
Let me just say one more thing, because I do really care about this stuff. So this is a perfect point that she's making. How government here, when we're building 526, we're making that road, we're creating a structure that's going to encourage, to some extent, people to drive. But at the same time, we're not investing in public transit. I mean, these are system-wide choices, right? But then they also do affect what individuals choose to do, to some extent. I mean, there's a bit of chicken and egg here, but to some extent, these things are playing to each other. And if you just think about the massive subsidies that the automobile gets from the government, I mean, it's massive. If you start to, when there's a car accident, police have to come, someone's paying for them to be there. When they're, all of these are massive, massive subsidies that public transit often doesn't get.
Just to pile on this topic, and not to make you give up or anything, but the extent to which we haven't addressed this issue in this region is unbelievable to me. I mean, the CARTA buses, let's just take the buses alone, which most of which came from the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. They gave us these buses after the Olympics, so it's like the oldest fleet in the United States that we have. Now there's a few new ones.
And some hybrids.
But this includes the dash buses, the oldest fleet. So to replace the fleet we have today would cost probably something like $75 million. We don't have any money to replace the buses, so we're starting at zero. And that doesn't get you better service. On Folly Road, that bus comes once an hour. So to actually have transit service, it needs to be 10, 15 minutes, I mean, 20 minutes max. So to get the additional service, we're not talking about operating that $75 million. So it's the most important issue, I think, in terms of the economic future and sustainability of Charleston, is to actually, and really you don't hear that much discussion about it, except during forums like this, where people really want to say, how are we going to pay for this? Because that's what it comes down to. How are we going to pay for it? Now, one thing about Folly Road is we actually do have some money. We're getting ready to start a big redesign of Folly Road. There's a team of consultants that's going to come in and look at Folly and say, how do we change this road to incorporate transit, better bike and pedestrian, deal with some of the traffic flow issues at intersections. Just a comprehensive study, and it's a big budget for this study, so it'll really be interesting. And one other thing I'm learning about meetings, I'm amazed at how many young people I know that don't read the newspaper. I am not an advocate of the Post and Courier, but you gotta read the newspaper. I mean, if you care about these issues, that's a good place to start. Because they write about most stuff, maybe more than you'd like.
They mention us fairly often, yes, they do.
And I'll also mention there's plans right now, specifically for Jamestown and Salt Beach, for Battery to Beach. Have you heard of that project? Maybe something you might want to research. There's some press releases for it. That's essentially a bike lane from the Battery all the way to Folly Beach and back. And I'm a big advocate for bicycling. One of my biggest pet peeves when I'm going down a bike lane and then it ends. All of a sudden it ends. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? That's a huge design flaw and a flaw from those that have the funds, the planners, the city planners, that kind of thing. Bike lane and stop. But that's something that's in the works that I'm excited about. I think it'll go through those bridges near West Ashford. But as far as the timeline, I don't have that information. I don't know if anyone up here does.
Well, it also goes through Mount Pleasant. We've opened the majority of ours. We have Battery Beach open in Mount Pleasant all the way over. We just finished the bike ped path, the 8-foot wide back ped path with county sales tax dollars on the Bensory Boulevard section. So the causeway now has a wide path. So our Battery Beach, we had to redirect it because we haven't finished Golden Boulevard, but it is dedicated. Signs are up.
So what influences your decision to, in government, the decisions to increase these funds and these dedications of resources to alternative transportation and public transportation? Because it seems like just from a student and grew up in Charleston resident, that ridership and usage alone is insufficient, because with CARTA, over the past decade and a half, has proved itself to be the most incompetent public administration in the history of Charleston, South Carolina. And that the bicycling situation is also murderous, because I've had friends and relatives either killed or grievously injured trying to bike around Charleston. So it seems like there's a chicken and egg problem going on, where to try to use any of these alternative transportation, you're essentially being Sisyphus, and to take a car is completely safe and normal and getting, the better part of the deal.
So let me just say a few things. One is that I get it. I take CARTA every single day. I took it this morning to come here, but I would not say that they're the worst. I would disagree to say that they're the worst managed. I mean, they are doing the best with what they have, I think. I mean, the buses are very clean. They tend to come on time, although the other day when it was raining, the buses were very, very late. And coming from New York City, where the public transit is really, really good, I can say generally I think CARTA is sort of in the realm of trying to do the best with the resources that they have. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some problems there. So I just want to say I think CARTA is doing what they can with the resources. How do you? Your question was, how do you encourage more ridership there? Or
How do you make this stuff happen? Because it's enough to talk about it that there's, it's going to happen, but that's just vapor. How do you? What is the right process to take?
Yeah,
You elect officials who care about the issues that you want to care about.
I want to circle back to the point about it all comes back to planning, but I would say planning can do, just like anyone can do, only so much. I mean, there are cultural ideals in the United States that planners have to grapple with all the time. In 1932, the federal government convened a panel of experts to show what the ideal American living situation was, and it was a single, detached unit, rural, rustic property with a single house on it. That was what was telegraphed to the entire country as what we should be living in. So I agree with Linda's point that there's a cultural dimension to this, and sometimes that informs who we elect for politicians. So to the extent that we can be aware of that and, in small corners try to change it, I think that's one thing we can do.
And final question, we only have a couple minutes.
My question is concerning parking infrastructure. It's certainly an inevitability that the population is going to grow here, that as we sprawl out, there's going to be more people commuting downtown, but we are not going to have any more land allocated for parking. I've done maps of what public parking looks like here and private parking, and it's just very underutilized. That I've gone into the parking garages at certain times of night, and I'm not going to say any averages, but sometimes we have 10% of the parking space is full.
and it's only on the bottom floors. And the ones that are in the top floors have probably been there for a few days, so it's not used, it's basically just a paid parking spot. I've done a lot of research about how driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, ride sharing, how they will start affecting urban life. And done a lot of thinking about what the streets would look like if there were no cars. And that certainly would have been the classic model of what Charleston was intended to be, and it's kind of been usurped by the industrial or the car manufacturing. There's so much money being made by people who are not living in these cities, and they probably don't care very much about what we have to go through. The parking lanes, or just, there would be so much more room for our economy and our quality of life if we weren't giving it to cars. And has there been any thought about how to increase the efficiency of the spaces that we already have? Is there any thought about how to incentivize people to give up their on-street parking so that they can use those spaces? It seems just that it doesn't make any sense to build any more if the ones that we're using aren't being utilized. And I think that's a policy problem because they're perfectly good structures. You've got the electric vehicle charging on Queen Street. There's plenty of infrastructure there, and it can't be that people don't know about it. They drive by all the time. I just feel like people would rather park one block closer to their house than it just seems like a dissonance that we have all the things that we want, but we still complain.
Well, one thing is, so far our approach with parking in Charleston has been that if you come to Charleston, you should find a parking space very close to where you want to go. And it's not going to be that way anymore. We can't build any more parking, down in the historic district. If anything, it's going to be more remote parking that's tied to transit and those kinds of things. That we're entering a different era of parking. Now, the parking problem isn't at night. It's during the day. And most of our garages are quite full during the day. We'll need a few others. But most of this goes back to the cultural side of this. What are people's expectations and what are they asking their elected officials and who are they electing to make decisions? And what are they taking to city council or town council? So I think it's very much about, a different voice, helping lead and make decisions in each of these communities that care about these issues.
One summary point, I think, comes back to something Linda mentioned earlier, is that, it's about increasing choices. I mean, the car is going to be with us. No one's here for perception of safety, often not the reality. So, I think the car will be with us for some time into the future, but what I think people want to see happen is to have other choices. If I can walk someplace, if I can take the bus someplace, if I can move around, take my bike to a place where my road will, the path will be continuous for me. Those are ways I think that we can start to say the car is one choice among several other viable choices, and then you may see a different landscape in the future.
Well, thank you so much for everyone who was able to come, and we